Welcome back, everyone. Today we're gonna have a bit of a technical video about printing stems with the master effects on the stems. And then I will also have some template housekeeping questions that I'm answering towards the end, just questions that come up a lot that I'm just gonna answer in one video. So if you're more interested in that, I'm gonna create chapters as usual so you can skip forward to whatever interests you. Now, I've already created a video about stem printing. Depending on who you're sending your stems to, you're printing them differently. I'm going to link the original video somewhere here. It's one of my really old videos from many years ago, but it still stands. But there is a question that comes up on the Discord server that I help manage. I can link below if you want to join that. It's a question that keeps coming up and that people have also asked in the comments, so I figured I'd make a video about it to kind of have this follow-up to my original stems video. Now let's look at this QA session. This is something from an alt ending of a queue from Woodwalkers 2. The way that you would normally print the stereo ref is simply by going into this export dialog and just rendering the stereo reference. Now the issue comes up if you have stuff on the master fader and you start to print stems where things are not reacting to the full mix. And one big rule of stem printing is that the individual stems have to exactly match the stereo reference that you printed. So when you A/B them at the end, there should be no audible difference. So then what do you do if, looking over here, you have stuff on the master fader? Now there's a school of thought that says never put anything on the master fader, which is valid. I subscribe to the school of thought you can do whatever you want as long as you know why you're doing it and how to correctly do it. So as you can see here, I have Gullfoss on here, the master unit, and I have some neutron on here. Apparently I had too much bass going on in the overall queue, and so, or very low frequency, under 60 hertz. It was just a bit boomy, so I put a dynamic EQ on here that reacts to the full mix and just dips out a little bit of that. And then I have ozone on here, usually. I don't put anything into ozone that is threshold based, as in that would react to the full mix, because ozone cannot be sidechained. We'll get to that in a moment. We're going to need sidechain capability for anything that reacts to the full signal. So in here, I only have static EQ, an exciter, imager, tape, and the maximizer, which is technically reacting to the full mix, but I'm not using the maximizer as a limiter. If you're using a limiter, you're gonna have to use one that actually has sidechain capabilities. I just use this to generally bring up the volume of a cue that was just a bit soft, but I'm not using this to compress the signal. So this is still fine because it's gonna react similarly to everything that comes through it, no matter if it's the full signal or just stems. And then I have something, just an analyzer, tonal balance control, that doesn't do anything. But so what do we do now? Because say we have neutron and Gullfoss, which both react to the full signal. So if we now solo the individual stems and just say play all the strings through this, it's going to react differently than it would to the full mix. And that's the problem. So then the stems would not fully match the stereo reference. So how do we get the stems to match the stereo reference? So the first thing you have to do is mute all of that, deactivate all of these plugins. You can leave tonal balance control on because that's not doing anything. Go to the export window and just regularly export your 48K 24-bit WAV file. Just export it, and I usually call it to mix no master, which means the stereo mix without the master plugins. That's what we're trying to get. Everything else stays on. Once you've done that, you can turn these back on and then go to the other page. So what I've done here, this track right here, I call it to mix no master because that's what I call these exports. This is just a regular stereo track, but what you see here, it goes to no bus. It has no output. It doesn't go into the stereo out or anything. So you can't actually hear it, but it's there. And then the other thing you do on this track is you set the solo button to solo defeat so that this always stays on. Even if I solo the strings, see how everything else gets muted? This stays on if it's on solo defeat. Really important. Otherwise, if this is not on solo defeat and I solo the strings, this gets muted. We don't want this muted ever. So back on solo defeat. The shortcut on PC is Alt-click on it. It's something similar on Mac, I'm assuming. Google it. But so then you load the track that you just exported with no master effects onto this track. And that's all you got to do with this, right? You just leave it there. You can't hear it, but it always stays on. And then you go back to the other page and you go into the 2 plugins that need to react to that full mix, okay? And what you do now is you're setting them to sidechain. With Neutron, you have to do it here as well, set it to external sidechain. It's actually quite nice. In Neutron, you can sidechain and also choose whether it's a dynamic EQ for every individual band. Not that I've ever used that, but it's kind of cool that you can. And then in Cubase, you would go up here, activate the sidechain, and then link it, like you would click on this, and then you can link it to any track. I've already linked it by default. You can save this in your template. That's why I have that track always there already. So I can already set it up in all these plugins that I normally put on the master. So you just set it up, link it over here to this track that we created to mix no master. So now this is going to react to that track. And you do the same thing here. You gotta set the side chain down here, turn it on up here, and you see like it's no longer reacting to anything because now it's reacting to this track. Again, you have to manually add it. With me, it's just already added because it's in my template. That's why we love templates. And then in Ozone, you can just leave it. In my case, I mean, you can't sidechain it anyway. You can see there's no sidechain button up here or anywhere down here. But this is fine because it's static, so it's going to react the same to all of it. And then tonal balance control, as I already said, is doing nothing. This is an analyzer tool. You could just turn that off if you want. But so you can do that with most plugins, just not Ozone, which is funny because it's a mastering plugin. I kind of hope that in the future they're going to make Ozone sidechain capable. But so that's why I don't put anything in there that I would have to sidechain, because you can't. So any dynamic EQ that I have always goes into Neutron, and anything else, any sort of compression or anything like that would go outside of Ozone in this chain. So if you want to check if you did this right, all you have to do is mute the MIDI. So this isn't playing back, and this one's still going to nowhere. So it's just going to be silence when you play back, right? Hearing nothing. But let's go to the other page. Look at Golfos. It's doing its job. It's reacting to the audio track with the full mix. Same thing with Neutron. It's reacting to the full audio track, not the MIDI that would be coming through. Okay? I hope this is clear. Because it sounds complicated, but once you get it, you get it. So then now you would be ready to print stems, because say you're now soloing the strings to just print all the strings, or obviously you can do it, if your template is properly set up, you can just print everything together by going to, let's say, the dub stems. Let's say we're sending this to the dub stage. So then you could just print all of these simultaneously. And then all you'd really have to do down here is obviously select the correct export settings. And then you just do master groups and sends. You want everything on it, right? And then add to queue. And then you could just print all of them in one go and you're done. Or obviously, if you don't have this properly set up, which shame on you, you should have a template. I have made enough videos about this. But if you want to do it manually and say, okay, I'm just going to do the brass like this, or hey, I'm just going to just do the horns, and you just solo these and export them, it would still work, right? Because the plugins that need to react to the full mix are reacting to this track. So it's still going to be accurate. And then if you really want to double check at the end if it really worked, you just load the stereo ref, like the full stereo export as you had it, and the stems, and you just A/B it. I normally do this in Pro Tools because we usually have to deliver in Pro Tools anyway, either to the dub mix or the scoring stage or the score mixer. Like, no matter where I'm delivering, it's going to be inside of Pro Tools. So I will print here and then at the end import everything into Pro Tools and then A/B things there. And if I notice any discrepancies, I'll go back in here and see where the mistake happened. But anyway, so yeah, this is how you do that. If you are someone like me who likes to put things on the master fader. Again, there's a different school of thought where some people say don't put anything on the master. I say you can do it if you know what you're doing and if you know why you're doing it, okay? Don't just follow what I do just because I do it. If it doesn't make sense for you to have stuff on the master, don't do it. Okay? Things sometimes make sense for my workflow. That doesn't mean they make sense for everyone's workflow. But since this has come up, I figured I will show it to the crowd that works like me. Anyhow, let's move on to the other questions that come up. One question that is very frequently asked in DMs and on my videos is, why do I have the parallel compression set up like this? Instead of using a plugin like, say, I think Neutron Compressor could do this. Yes. So a lot of plugins have a mix slider where you can dial in how much of the effect you want in the signal. So in theory, you could just do that instead of having this set up with like 2 tracks and then the send and where I dial it in through this fader. Sure. You could, but let's use our brains for 1 second. Okay, look at this page. Look at how many tracks. Say I have some extra compression dialed into the horns here, and I took out a little bit in the woodwinds because I thought it was too much. And maybe I have some high metals where it was also a bit too much, but like in the mid percussion and the toms, I actually dialed it up. Now I can see with one look through the faders, I have a visual representation of where I dialed something in, where I took something out, right? I can easily see, oh yeah, this one I dialed up a little bit. Imagine having this in 30 plugins up here that you manually have to open in order to see this slider. Do you want to open 30 plugins every time you want to see if you dialed something in or not, and how much you dialed in? I don't. You know, it's a huge waste of time, and people are like, oh, but it's such a waste of tracks and waste of time to set it up like this. The whole point of setting it up like this is to save time. That's the whole point of a template, that you set it up once and then never again. That's the beauty of it. I never have to do anything with this page. I just do it once, and it's there, and it's saved as a preset up here. So nothing needs to be done once it is set up. But it would be way more work if on every single cue, every time I change something in the parallel compression, I would have to open up manually all of these plugins to see what I did in them, right? That would cost way more time than taking that little slice of time to set this up one time and then never doing it again. Anyhow, that is the explanation for that. Then the next question is, why do I sometimes bypass plugins and why do I have some deactivated entirely, and what's the difference? So if a plugin is bypassed, it looks like this, grayed out. And if it's completely deactivated, it looks like that, meaning this on and off button is entirely off versus this is bypass and not bypass. Now, there is a difference between deactivating a plugin and bypassing a plugin. Deactivating a plugin turns it off completely, meaning it removes it from active memory and it stops its code from running. So it basically frees up all system resources that it was previously hogging. So the plugin is entirely removed from the signal chain. The signal does not pass through it. Any latency it created also is removed. It's basically treated as if it's not there. This is particularly good if you have a big template and you have a lot of plugins loaded in your template that you don't always need, especially on instruments that you don't always need, because it's just going to hog resources. It's going to create longer save times. It's going to create bigger save files. It's going to create longer load times, right? If you don't need certain things all the time because there are instruments that you don't use all the time, or certain reverbs that you only use in special occasions, but you have them loaded in your template, you can just completely disable them so that they don't take up any resources whatsoever and they don't slow down the process and they don't create any latency or anything that you don't need. So really good if you have a large template with a lot of plugins preloaded, or if you have also very heavy plugins loaded that you currently don't need. Now, bypassing is slightly different in that it keeps the plugin on. It just doesn't process the signal. So it passes the dry signal through it, essentially, but the signal still passes through it. It often still uses CPU and RAM because the plugin is still there, it's still loaded, and it has to be ready if you're hitting the bypass button to reactivate it, then, the processing has to be there, right? Immediately. And if it's a plugin that creates latency, even if you bypass it, it will still create the same latency as if it were on, because the signal is still passing through that plugin that is creating the latency. So you would bypass a plugin when you basically want to just compare the wet and dry signal very quickly. That's kind of what it's for. Whereas disabling is really for, I don't need this right now at all. So let's just, I want to keep it in here because I might need it later, or I might need it in a different queue, right? So I want to keep it in here with the presets loaded and everything, but I don't need it right now in this queue. So I'm just going to disable it and not have it hog any resources that, don't need to be used up right now by something that is meaningless for the queue. So yeah, this is why sometimes you will see me deactivate things and sometimes you will see me just bypass things. If I know I'm going to need something in a minute, it's just going to be bypassed. Now, this is an interesting question because it comes up quite a bit from colleagues, actually, that are also watching my videos. If I have the processing already on while composing, the answer is yes. And again, there is a different school of thought that says you shouldn't have any processing on while you're composing. Valid school of thought. If that's you, go ahead. Nothing wrong with that. There are just certain things that I will always do, so I already have it preloaded. For example, this is my flute output. And this is always the EQing I have on the flutes that I use. So there will never be any frequencies here. And I always have some buildups here. And I will always boost the high end here. I don't remember why I did that dip, but it has a meaning probably. I did that a long time ago and saved it as a preset. So this is specifically for the flutes that I'm using, the flute samples. In the mic positions that I'm using, I just found that over and over again, I was doing this exact EQ movement when I was composing. So eventually I was like, you know what, I could just save this as a preset and save myself the time. Now, this is very light processing. This is not doing a ton. And it's the same for a lot of these things that I have on by default. Like I will have the Lexicon and Valhalla reverb on by default. That's my default reverb. And then I will add the cinematic rooms in Seventh Heaven for the instruments where I feel like they could use that. But yeah, there are certain things, and this is also how I keep changing my template the most, is by simply going, hey, I find that on this particular instrument, I always do this particular EQ, or I always use this particular reverb, I always add a delay to this, or I, always use soothe to take out specific frequencies out of that. So why don't I just save that as a preset and just have it in there, have it bypassed or deactivated potentially. But yeah, I will have it in here, and very often while I'm composing, I will already have certain things on just because I know I will need that. Like the piccolo flute does not need any low frequencies on it. It's fine. Now, this doesn't mean that I never change this. If later on I'm like, ooh, there's a lot of high piercing stuff going on there that is too much, then I can always just do this, right? I don't have to keep it the way I had it. This is how I have processing on by default. It's just stuff that I keep always doing. And so I'm just saving myself some time. It does not alter the sound so fundamentally that it would alter my mixing or my composition. It's just very, very light processing that can already be on because it's just very basic filtering and very basic brightening the sound a bit and taking out the muddiness a little bit. And then once the cue is done, I go in and I'm like, all right, now what do I need to change? Like, what EQ do I actually need to apply? What EQ do I need to modify? So this is not static. This is not set in stone. The template is just a starting point, and the light processing that is on it is just the starting point for the mixing, so I don't have to repeat movements over and over and over again. It's just to save time, essentially. The reason why some people say don't have it on when you're composing is because mixing has to happen in context. This is one of the issues that I have when people ask if I could, give them my presets for, how I EQ my violins or something. There is no one way to EQ violins. It depends on which library you're using, which hall that was recorded in, which microphones, which mic positions, how was it pre-processed, what are you layering it with, does the layering create extra buildups? For example, my string EQs usually look a little bit crazy because I layer so many string libraries on top of each other that there are buildups in certain areas that I need to heavily filter out. But that doesn't mean that that's how you generally EQ strings. That's just how I need to do it because of how I program MIDI, right? So there is no one way of doing things because how I EQ my low percussion, for example, is very much determined by, do I have a lot of bass in it? Do I have some low synthesizers and low brass and low percussion and low strings in there? Okay, then something's got to give. So I would heavily EQ some of these instruments to make room for the others. But that happens in context. That doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So you cannot treat instrument EQing like you would EQ them isolated because they're not isolated. Things happen in context when you're mixing. That's why some people say, oh, you shouldn't have processing on it while you're composing, which is kind of where I find the middle ground of I will have very light processing on, but it's just a starting point because I do understand that based on the composition that I write, I'm going to need to adjust things later because mixing happens in context of the piece. Who is playing? Who's playing at what volume? What libraries did I use? What did I layer? Where are the points that need cleaning up, right? And it's going to be different in every piece. So this is my middle ground, how I do these things. Again, absolutely valid to say you don't want any processing on your stuff while you're composing. For me, it's really a question of I have to get so much done that I don't have time to do everything from scratch all the time. So whatever I can roll off into a template, I will roll off into a template. Another question that comes up a lot, and it's annoying me a little bit, not gonna lie. Why do I have SoundID on the master? I could just use the control room. I know the control room exists, my friends. Please stop pointing it out to me. I tried it out. I didn't like it. I don't like using the control room. I also don't need the control room. So I put SoundID on my master. Makes no difference other than when you export, you have to remember to deactivate the plugin, which I'm not a little dum-dum, so I don't forget that. But if you are prone to forgetting that, then maybe do use the control room. We all have to know ourselves and how we like to do things. And this is how I like to do it. But yeah, I don't generally forget to turn stuff off when I export. So if that's you, don't do it like me. Simple as that. Just because I do something a certain way does not mean you have to do it a certain way. Another question that comes up frequently is, why do I use iZotope instead of Fabfilter? No particular reason. It's just how I started, and I'm sticking to the infrastructure. There's nothing wrong with Fabfilter. They're also an industry standard. There's barely a studio where I haven't seen Fabfilter being used. So there's no reason not to use it. If you prefer Fabfilter, all power to you. Both iZotope and Fabfilter make professional grade, absolutely fantastic plugins. I don't think you're missing out if you're with one or the other. I will say that. So if you have a ton of Fabfilter stuff and you're watching my videos and you're seeing me use a lot of iZotope, that doesn't mean you now have to get all the iZotope stuff. It's doing the same thing, okay? They're EQs and they're compressors and, like they're basic tools. Both of them do the same thing, okay? There's no reason to buy the entire Fabfilter suite and to buy the entire Ozone suite, iZotope suite. Just go to their websites, watch their walkthroughs, and then pick whichever one appeals to you more. Sometimes it's something as simple as, I like the interface of this one more because it feels more intuitive, right? So then go with that. You don't need 20 EQs unless you're an actual mix engineer and you actually hear the difference between one EQ and another. There's no reason for composers to actually buy every EQ and buy every compressor and this and that. Like just pick one or two and then stick with it unless you really, really hear the difference, which for most people is just not the case. At the end of the day, they're all doing the same thing. Listen, if you're using the internal stuff from Cubase, you're fine as well. That's really great stuff. I don't use it because I have iZotope, but if I was starting out right now and I didn't have any Fabfilter or iZotope, I would just use the stuff that's in Cubase for now. Nothing wrong with that either. Same with Logic. When I was on Logic, I used a lot of the plugins inside of Logic. Great stuff. Like, don't worry so much about it. It's more about knowing how to use the plugins than having specific plugins. There's very few plugins where I would say this one does such a very specific thing that I would get that. But if it's just your regular EQ or compressor or whatever, don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. It's not that important. Now, some people have asked how to determine the negative track delays, which are not the same as latency, by the way. David Cadell made a great video about that on his channel, where I think he might also have explained how to get to the negative track delays. But either way, sure, let's get into it for a minute. First things first, you have these. Not the earrings, the ears. You have ears. Your mother worked hard to grow these for you, so I suggest you use them, okay? A lot of labor went into giving these to you. It's the best thing you have. So all you really have to do is pick a line, either, shorts, longs, whatever track you have going on, play back the line, turn on the click while you're playing it back, and then slowly but surely move this backwards until it feels like it's actually playing to the click. That would be one way, by ear. It's how I usually do it because I'm lazy. However, there are other ways. A lot of developers put it in their manual or into their walkthrough videos, or you could just write to their customer support and be like, hey, what are the negative track delays? But a lot of them these days actually put it out into the wild somewhere, so you can go find it. Another option is just write a tiny little 4-bar passage, whatever, bounce in place, and then zoom into the audio, and then you can see how much the delay is, right? You can just measure it in your DAW. Or another option, but this is kind of a weird one, that doesn't always work, but in some instruments it works. In theory, if you have the full version of Kontakt, and it's a library where you can click on the wrench, you can, in fact, go into the wave editor and into the you can click on any of these samples. Ideally, if the sample developer is not sloppy with the editing, they should all be the same. And then you can just zoom in and you can see how much empty space there is before the sample starts. In this case, it looks like 15 milliseconds. But yeah, that's how you figure that out. I'm afraid no matter how you do it, it's a lot of work. The fastest way is for developers just to tell us. They don't always do that. So I think if you all put a lot of pressure on them, they will do it though. So if you all complain collectively, I'm sure we can make that a normal thing, that developers will just tell us the numbers because they know the numbers. They've been editing the samples to a specific number. Either way, it's going to be a lot of labor, unfortunately. But again, that's what templates are for. You only do the labor once and then it's done. Another question that comes up frequently is why I don't use negative bar numbers. Now, this is a special cue because this is an alt ending of a cue, so the actual start of the cue is here. We just recorded the ending separately to be edited in case we choose the alt ending. But as you can see, at the beginning of this cue, my music start is on bar 3. In theory, you could just have it start in bar -1, then bar 0, and then have this be bar 1. I don't do that on purpose because, as I said earlier, when we deliver stuff in Pro Tools. And the moment you do your Pro Tools prep, you will find that the negative bar numbers do not translate into Pro Tools. Now, you can fix that inside of Pro Tools, obviously, but you're going to have to fix it then for 60 cues. Do you want to do that? And then you forget it one time, and then the bar numbers in the sheet music don't match with the numbers in Pro Tools, and then there's a lot of confusion at the session. And you want to risk it? No, I don't. It just causes extra work for no reason. Because there's nothing wrong with just starting on bar 3. I mean, what's the difference? Nothing. Even the sheet music. So what? The sheet music starts on bar 3. Bar 1 and 2 are clicks anyway. The musicians don't care whether it's bar 1 or bar 3. It makes no difference. The only important thing is that the bar numbers in the Pro Tools session, in the Cubase session, and in the sheet music all match. And for me, the easiest way to do that is by not having any shenanigans with negative numbers, because it doesn't always translate into other software. And then another question that comes up is, what about surround and Atmos? There are, as far as I know, maybe 2 or 3 composers that are actually working in surround or Atmos. I don't know anyone who's working actually in Atmos. But even surround, it just opens a whole can of worms for no reason. I mean, technically you wouldn't need full surround, you just would need 2 front, 2 back technically, because we normally stay away from the subwoofer and the center channel. I can do a basic surround mix if I have to deliver that for a short film or something. They want deliveries in surround. I can do that with a surround reverb and a surround upmix plugin called Halo Upmix, I think. I can do it. I prefer not to, because if I have to deliver a proper surround mix for something that actually goes into theaters, I'd rather have a professional with a proper surround studio that is calibrated and everything do that. At that point, when you have something go to theaters, you do also have the budget for a proper surround mix. So there isn't really a reason. And most of us don't necessarily use the surround mics from the different libraries either. It's obviously not consistent across rooms. And some libraries don't have surround mics, so then it would just be completely unbalanced. There just isn't much of a point to it. We have upmix plugins, so if we do need to create an upmix from stereo, we can do that, and it sounds perfectly fine. If we have live recording, the live recording will have surround mics, so it will already be recorded in surround. So what we do then is we take the mock-up, create a surround upmix, and then mix that into the live recording to match it. But yeah, usually score mixers, as far as I know, do not ask for like surround mics. I've asked 2 of my score mixers before if they want me to separately export surround mics for the libraries where I have them. And they're like, that would open such a crazy can of worms. We're just going to do the upmix with the upmix plugins and the surround reverbs that we have and call it a day, to just make sure that the balance is accurate, especially if we don't have surround mics for every single library that we're using. And especially since we're also mixing and matching libraries with different rooms and stuff, it's not the best to do that. And it's not necessary. Like if you work on TV movies, very often they don't even ask for a surround delivery, something like Hallmark. They never ask for surround, they just want stereo stems. And again, if it is a production that's asking for surround, usually that is a discussion that is had up front where they make budget available to create a surround upmix later by a professional. Also, something that has happened on lower budget productions where they wanted a surround mix is the mixers at the final mix, the dub mixers, are also perfectly capable of creating a music surround mix. So sometimes they're like, just send over the stereos and we will create a surround up mix for you as part of our final mix. So sometimes they will do it as well. But yeah, if you are starting out, I would not worry so much about it because that's usually not our job. That's usually a mixer's job. And if it is our job, it doesn't mean we have to have some complicated surround setup. It's fairly easily done with a couple of plugins. But yeah, it's a discussion you need to have when you make the contract. Because if they really want like a proper, like certified surround mix that's going to play in theaters, then they're going to have to pay for that. And then one big question that came up with the release of Cubase 15, I think, whether or not I will now switch to, expression maps, now that in Cubase 15 you can enter individual negative track delays for the different articulations. First of all, I'm not sure, has anyone tested that, if it's working? Because I don't know. I never upgrade to the latest version of anything, certainly not while I'm in the middle of a project. Let's look at it from a production standpoint. Because the answer is no, I will not switch to expression maps. Because expression maps make sense for someone who thinks in notation, right? Who thinks of an instrument being on one notated line. That's the expression map thinking, which is not necessarily the music producer thinking, and we are music producers. If you look at this cue alone, you will see that through the entire cue, we have shorts going on. But also, throughout this entire part of the cue, we have sustains going on. This is very, very common. I can pull up some sheet music where you can see that it's also recorded separately at the recording sessions when you have something like this. This is very common in film music and in video game music, that you're just gonna have 2 passes of the same thing. So you almost have like a double orchestra. And this is not bad writing or anything, that is just production. That is how we create this larger than life feel, right? So it's super common to have multiple articulations going on at the same time. And if you look at any of my latest videos as well, where I talk about going beyond the orchestra, you can see that we don't treat instruments like they are notated if we're in the DAW. We're treating them as a separate thing that we can control. So the expression map thinking, or having all articulations on one track thinking, is more performer and orchestrator or concert composer thinking versus music producer thinking. Remember, we don't make music for live performance. Even when we record, as I just said, we don't record this in one go. We don't DVC the orchestra. We just do 2 passes, a shorts pass and a longs pass. And sometimes even like an effects pass, right? There will be multiple passes of the same thing, unless you specifically write it to be played in one pass. The way we do mock-ups has little to do with what ends up on the page or what a performer does. Like sometimes I will have things jumping back and forth between different tracks, but then the orchestrator will put it onto one line. But I need it on different tracks so I can process things differently, for example. Just to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that, what I will do often is layer a regular sustain or legato patch and a tremolo patch over each other. The orchestrator would translate that into half trem, which is usually how it's written in my score. So it will just be one line in the score with the same notes, and it'll just say half trem at the top, meaning the section this applies to would DVC themselves by the music stand side. So I think the concert master usually decides, and we'll just call it out, like everybody on the left play tremolo and everybody on the right play regular. Because sometimes that's the effect I want. I want tremolo, but not so aggressive. I want more like a sustain that has the unease of tremolo in it. So in a live context, they would DVC themselves. I can't do that in the DAW. I'm gonna need both of these articulations on separate tracks. And having them on separate tracks will also allow me to balance it exactly the way I want it, as we would in a live context. If at the scoring stage I'm like, ooh, that's a little too much tremolo, then all the people playing tremolo would just take it down a bit, right? Or they would just decide there's going to be fewer people playing the tremolo. That's how you would do it in the room, but that's not how you do it in the DAW. In the DAW, you're going to need that on 2 different tracks so that you can control them, right? How would I do this if I have sustains and tremolos on the same track and I can only play one or the other? And then even, I know in some libraries it's possible to trigger 2 articulations at the same time. Even if you can do that, then how would I volume balance them, right? If one of them is louder than the other, or they have different velocities, or maybe I want one of them to be purposefully louder, how would I balance that? At the scoring stage, different story, we DVC and we adjust it in the room as we see fit. Another example is, in order to accomplish a simple sound that one live section would just do in one go, we sometimes have to layer a bunch of shit on top of each other to make it sound good, because samples are samples and they're just not always doing what you want them to be doing. For example, runs passages, and I don't mean just a run up or a run down where you can use pre-recorded runs, but more like the Harry Potter-ish runs where you have like runs going on for a little while. In order to program those and make them sound good, I don't just use legatos. I also layer trills into them and tremolos and shorts from a variety of libraries to give it that washy sound that you would have if you had live strings, because just using legatos usually sounds kind of shit. And we don't want things to sound like shit, so we do things in the DAW that logically don't make sense, but that sonically end up sounding quite nice. Now, my orchestrator would see that, and if we're recording, he would translate that into a simple run on the page, because he sees all those tracks doing the same thing, and he's like, okay, she did that because it sounded shit with just the legato samples. So he understands. This is where film orchestrators are super useful, because they understand what we do in the DAW sometimes to make it sound good, and they translate it much more simply onto the page. Because on the page, it's just a simple run, obviously. Sometimes I'm extra nice and already clean up all the weird doublings just to clear up any confusion that might come up. But usually film orchestrators, especially in LA and in London, they know the weird shit that we do in the DAW. Like, they'll see it and be like, because they also listen to the audio file and they'll just hear this beautiful run and they're like, wow, that took a lot of tracks to make that sound good, which it does. But again, how would I do that if I have all the articulations on the same track? because especially with the runs, you're going to have to be very careful how loud the shorts are going to be, how loud the trills and trems are going to be, because you just want them like as a slight color in there, like as a slight, thing that just makes it sound more fluid. But the loudest articulation usually should still be the legatos. So you're going to have to do a lot of finessing for quite a bit of time to make that sound decent. How would you do that if all of the articulations are on the same track? Here's another example. When I want tenutos or like long marcatos, sometimes the pre-recorded tenutos or marcatos are not long enough. They're not the exact length for the piece that I'm writing. So what I do is I will layer sustains into them and taper them out. Like I'll fade them out with CC11 and CC1, right? So I get the attack of the marcato and then the fade and the exact length of the sustain. It's a lot of stupid labor, but that's what we have to do. If things are not recorded exactly the way that we need them for the piece, then we have to come up with little workarounds like that. Again, not something you can do if you have all of that stuff on the same track. In the more produced styles, it's very common to have a ton of articulations going on at the same time. In a recording context, would result in triple or quadruple divisi, which is why we're not doing that in a live context. In a concert hall, you would have to do that, obviously. But in a recording stage, you don't have to quadruple divisi anything. You can just do multiple passes. And also, the different passes are often processed differently, right? Even if you look here into my template, you can see that I have long strings and short strings processed differently. They have different amounts of reverb, and then the short strings also have a delay on them. There's a bunch of stuff on these that is not on the other, which is a very common production thing to do, that you process shorts differently from longs. And, you have the concert purists who are like, but that's not how it would sound in real life. We're not mimicking real life. It's production. It's produced music. It's not live music. Of course, in a live hall, it wouldn't sound different. It would be in the same hall and with the same reverb. And of course, that's live music. We don't do live music. We do recorded music that is processed and then played in another medium that was also heavily mixed. So even after we deliver stuff to the dub stage, they do all their processing on top of it. So what you're hearing is not real by any means. Like, no matter how you try to twist and turn this, it's not real. None of it is real. This is not what it would sound like in a concert hall, and that's okay, because it doesn't go to a concert hall. It doesn't have to adhere to that standard. I went on that rant before. If you want to hear that, go back 1 or 2 videos. But anyway, this is why some people's mock-ups sound so much better than others. Because some of us layer a ton of articulations and libraries and really figure out exactly which layer at which volume has to play in order to get the perfect result. And we separate things out and process them differently to get the cleanest result and the biggest sounding or most sweeping sounding result, the most alive sounding result. If you ever wondered why, for example, John Powell's mixes sound so great, watch some of that behind the scenes footage. Watch how much they are recording things separately and process things separately, because none of that sounds real. It is real instruments, but if you listen to the mix, those are so crisp and so powerful, but they're not real. This is not what an orchestra would sound like in a room, because it's heavily processed and striped, meaning the sections were recorded separately. And then other instruments were also completely isolated and processed entirely differently. So that's just the sound of film music in a lot of cases. And that's also the sound of video game music in a lot of cases. It's heavily processed. It requires a lot of work, a lot of detailed work, a lot of editing and a lot of processing, a lot of layering to make it sound the way it does, to give it that, larger than life, not quite real orchestra sound. Anyway, I I know that a lot of people are opposed to split tracks and all that because it's not the cleanest way to go and it makes things complicated and you have to do a lot of heavy lifting on the programming side. You have to do a lot of manual labor to make things sound perfect. But you can't take the easy way out and then wonder why someone else's mock-up sounds 100 times more refined than yours. It's probably because that person went out of their way and did not do the easiest way of setup, but did the way that would yield the best results. And it's not the libraries or plugins that do it. It's how these people use their libraries and plugins, how they refine everything, how they spend hours and hours on small details that other people would not spend time on. And for me personally, part of that process is, unfortunately, having a shit ton of libraries and tracks loaded, layering a lot, and having to do a lot of manual programming labor and a lot of balancing between all the elements and a lot of individual processing that has to happen in order for it to sound the way it sounds. Anyways, as always, do what sounds best instead of clinging to whatever makes sense in theory. Too many people cling to what theoretically makes sense in their head. Just try things out. Try them out. And then use your ears. You have them attached to your head. Use them. They're your best asset. Use them and determine whether you like something or whether you don't like something, and then make a judgment based on that and not based on, I think this would sound weird. Try it out. Maybe it doesn't sound weird. Maybe it sounds amazing. And then you're like, all right, I was wrong. Let's go with it. Your ears need to be the final judge, not what is most logical on paper. You tinker until you find the thing that works, even if your mind says it shouldn't work. Just be curious. This is the key. Be curious and try things out. And then use your ears. Anyway, that's all I had to say for today. Now, as usual, go practice.